Welcome to the Hustle and Flow podcast. I'm Shaun the Hustle.
And I'm Les the Flow.
Let's go.
All right, mate. So this week, we're back to you and me. The last couple of weeks, we've had some awesome interviews with some guests. And we're returning to a little bit of a regular rhythm, a nice one-on-one conversation. And it's also my turn to bring up a topic. And I think that's a nice way to segue into the topic, which is going to be everything surrounding the word normal.
Ooh, all right.
Back to normal, quote unquote.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the reason and a little bit of context about why this topic has been a little bit front of mind for me. We're recording this mid-April 2020 in Sydney, Australia. We've been in self-isolation or quarantine for about a month now. And, just being observant about media and everything surrounding COVID-19, there's a lot of noise and there's a lot of, narrative around returning to a state of normalcy. And I really wanted to talk on that because that in itself, in the current context, it shows a particular mindset of the collective, of what we see or what we perceive this problem or this pandemic as, right?
And what do you think that collective notion is?
Well, it's something that's uncomfortable and it's something that is undesirable, right? There's a lot of things that, so a lot of the context that I'm talking about, really, it's to do with things that, in the grand scheme of things, really do not weigh up, when you look at the big picture. So,
okay, I'm interested to see what you mean by that.
Yeah, so think about the sporting world at large.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people, it feels like there's a large yearning for entertainment of any sort. And when I look at various media sources for various professional sporting leagues, such as the NBA, the MMA community, UFC, things like that, people are just clutching at straws, grasping at whatever they can. They're replaying old videos, old matches, old highlights, all that sort of thing, just to give people a bit of entertainment. And I get where they're coming from. But there's also this notion about wanting to continue to push forward or counting down to when things are going to return to normal, and people are just itching for it.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to talk about that from that context in the very, current state of the world. But I also wanted to talk about it from a more personal view in terms of what the word generally means to each of us.
Okay.
So yeah, that's the topic, normal.
Cool. I think this will be an interesting one because we actually haven't been talked about this prior to you bring this up today. Obviously, we haven't been catching up apart from, our messages and the podcast episodes that we're recording here, and we chat a bit before and after. But this will be an interesting conversation to have. And I know I'm just getting this feeling that we're probably going to have some differing views on this one.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So give me your thoughts. I mean, when I talk about the current lay of the land and the perception that I feel the collective are having around this return to normalcy, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think before I explain what I think about it, the context to set is that, we're in Australia, and as a collective society in Australia, we don't really like being told what to do for the most part. We pride ourselves on freedom and liberty. Liberty is very much, a term that's been coined by Americans, but it applies for us Aussies as well, right? Like, we want to do what we want to do. And I think that's something that makes Australians Australians. And I really like that. And I think with that in mind, right, that people are feeling uneasy because everyone's being told what to do right now. And the thing is, whether you want to do it or not, it's being mandated. And I think people in Australia, in particularly, don't take too well to that. You know, in other countries, it's viewed very differently. The other thing we have here that's important to know, I think, is individualism, right? In Australia, we're prided on who we are as individuals, whereas in other countries and places, a lot of Asian countries and cultures, it's about the collective. You know, they're very much about the collective as a society, collective as a family unit. And so their adherence to things that are mandated and their adherence to things that they're told to do for what is quote unquote the greater good is what they focus on, right? Which is why you see a lot more compliance in places like that. And it's just not generally what's done here in Australia. And I think that was pretty apparent when, you know, before the lockdown actually started here, and social distancing was had started to be implemented and was being explained to people by the fact that people went out in droves to the beaches and, you know, hung out. And that's just, I think it's very reflective of how we are as a culture, in terms of we don't want to be told what to do and we want to do whatever we want to do. So with that in mind, I think that's what's really, that's at the core of this unrest that people are feeling, right? Because no one knows how long this is actually going to last. No one knows how long we're going to have to be in this state of being told what to do, which is what is happening. We are being told what to do. And regardless of what you think about it or what your view is, there's certain things that you have to do, right? Otherwise, there's actually penalties and things in place, regardless of whether you think it's good or not. So I think people are just itching to get back to being able to do whatever they want to do, whatever that may be, right? And I think what you were explaining, like sporting events and things like that, they're things that people enjoy. They're parts of a lot of people's lives. See, I'm not really into team sport. It's not my thing. So, you know, I haven't been following anything along the lines of what's happening with sport, what is, you know, that there's replays of matches going on, stuff like that. I haven't been aware of that. The one thing I have looked at is videos about the UFC, because I was interested in terms of Dana White was, or is setting up Fight Island, and he had a card lined up. I think it was April 18th and he was ready to go, and he was told that he couldn't do it from the powers that be, who are his partners, right? So, but the fact that he was pushing so hard, I think that also has to do with the type of man that he is. You know, he's known to push really hard, to do what he wants to do, to show that anything can be done. That's another topic, right? But that's the only thing I've seen sport-wise. Other things have been shut down completely, like F1, which is a super money sport, right? Which is a sport I'm interested in. Like, they've just cancelled races. And I know that there's a lot of money tied up in that, a lot of money being lost there. But on the flip side of the business side, it's also something people really enjoy. And they want to get back to doing things they enjoy, right? Because at the moment, sport, you can't go out, you can't go sit down, go somewhere to eat, you can't hang out with people that you want to hang out with. And depending on your situation of your living setup and where you are, that's also very different for a lot of people, right? People that have families or that have children, I imagine they want to do things very differently to people that are living alone, right? And the entertainment options for people are also very different. And what people just are interested in is very different. Some people want to be out. Other people are cool to stay in right now. And they're seeing it as a good time to just wind down, take a bit of time. But on the flip side of that as well, man, is the practicalities of that and the responsibilities that people have. You know, I was talking to someone about this the other day, which is, you know, they said to me that you should really appreciate the simple things in life, and this is showing us that. To which my response was, we've always been able to do that, right? It's just where you've chosen to spend your time or what you've chosen to focus on.
Totally.
And on the flip side of that, yes, big proponent of gratitude and being grateful for things, right? For everything that we have, and to try and find the good in situations which can be seen as being not ideal. But also, I think it's also important to note that there are people who are in certain situations right now that are going to find it very hard to relax and enjoy and do things, because they might be essential workers that are out when they don't want to be out, or they're people that have been stood down from their jobs and they can't get another one, and they've got children that they need to take care of, or kids that need to go to school, or that parents want to send to school but they're afraid to send them to school because of what they're being told. And all of these things are going to weigh on people's minds, right? And I think people just want to stop feeling the way that they're feeling because it's uncomfortable. And going back to normal, or whatever people think that is, I think people feel like that's going to get them there, and going to get them to release these feelings that they have that they don't want to be experiencing, and going back to feeling that the way that they were, which for a lot of people seems like they feel it will be better or was better then.
Yeah, totally, man. And I think that those last few words that you mentioned are quite key, right? About discomfort and feeling that this sense of normalcy will bring them out of that state and give them a sense of relief that they want. And that's what I want to touch on, more so from the current context. And I completely understand all the angles that you mentioned about, the practicalities and the differing levels of challenges that people will face depending on their personal circumstances. And I don't pretend to understand them at a experiential level, but I can intellectualize and understand them. Whether I agree with all of them or not, again, that doesn't really matter. I don't really have an opinion on that. I can only speak for my own experience and my own current state and mindset and views on what normal is, and a deep desire for the return of normal. And I think that it talks to how people view the world now. And I think it talks to, a level of disillusionment to certain things. And I will always talk on a more macro level. I don't want to talk too specific, because once you bring it down to a specific scenario, it'll change very slightly, right? Because everything is nuanced. But again, if we just touch on the sport concept or the sport discussion for a little bit, and if we talk about the grand scheme of things and what the goal, or what we strive to achieve by quarantining and self-isolating, it's to ensure that this pandemic is under control, right, to a level where we can handle it from from a national health system point of view, right? We don't want to overwhelm our health systems in all our countries. So this is the reason why we want to handle it before we have any sort of cure or vaccine or whatever it is that is going to be the overarching solution. And this is the reason why there's only essential services, and that's the key word here. If you think about, and I understand what Dana White is trying to do, because that's just the type of person he is. He's bullish, and he's very determined. But you can argue whether professional sports are essential services. Yeah. And I would really say that the large proportion of the the argument is going to skew towards it not being essential, right?
Yeah.
You can, of course, you can argue that it is from an entertainment and all that sort of standpoint, right?
I think there's other elements as well that you can argue that it's essential, right? And again, I think that's why it's important to look at the different perspectives.
Of course.
Because for the people that work for these sporting organizations that are supported by the wages they earn from them, right? They are essential to them.
Mm.
And that needs to be considered as well. And that's one of the debates that's going on right now at large in all countries in the world, is like, at what cost is what we're doing now coming at, right?
Yes.
And what effect is that going to have on people and on people's mental health and on their physical health as well, right? Which will, there will be manifestations in people's physical health from their mental health.
Of course.
Right? And how that's been affected by this. There will be people who, you know, just can't handle the pressures of what has happened and how their life is turning out or playing out because of things that they've been made to do. Right. So, and that's really, I don't have the answer to the question, but we do need to ask the question because, you know, the treatment needs to be in proportion to what the problem is.
Of course.
Not medically, but anything, right? Things need to be in proportion, and you can't overreact to something. Not that I'm saying that's what's happening, because I'm not trying to make a judgment on that. It's not for me to make, but you've got to be weighing up whether what you're doing is actually not detrimentally affecting other things to such a state while you're taking care of this thing over here.
Yep. Yeah.
And the perspective thing is really important, man, from that point of view, because what a lot of us do deem as not being essential is essential for others.
Yeah.
What's not a big deal for some people is a big deal for others.
For sure.
You know?
But
in terms of professional sport and it being essential or not, from an entertainment point of view, I agree. It is not essential, right? You seeing the way that someone bends a ball or, you know, carries out a maneuver or something sporting wise is not doing anything for your life that is essential. You enjoy it, and you might say, my enjoyment is essential to me. But let's be real, man, not really.
Yeah.
You like it. So from that point of view, agree, non-essential. But from point of view of the wider picture of what it does for people, financially, in terms of them being able to work, them having opportunities and things like that, all the way from, I'm not just talking about people that are in the organization, but there's people that work in stadiums, that work those jobs, you know, that sell food there, that clean those places, that do everything in support of these events, that are also losing out right now in terms of their employment. And, you know, a lot of people are in a tough spot.
Yeah. And perspective is key, 100%. And, you know, it'll change your views on whether you feel like it's essential or not, based on whether you're looking at from the bottom up or the top down, right? And that for me is where, and this is just my opinion, right, where the solution really lies. This is a top down thing because it is global, right? And I'll give you an example, exactly what you were talking about in terms of all these people who work in the stadiums and have jobs there, who are behind the scenes, who, you know, are the cogs in the big machine. The owner of the Dallas Mavericks basketball team, NBA basketball team, Mark Cuban, the day that he found out that the NBA was going to be postponed, the season was going to be postponed, he personally made the pledge that all his workers that are employed under the Dallas Mavericks company would continue to be paid. And that's from his pocket as a top down, as a leader, right? And again, I'm not necessarily saying that it's the responsibility of people like that, but I am saying that potentially the responsibility must fall on the leaders, right? Whatever the context is. And to me, I'm referring to world leaders, and we're not going to go into that too far, because I think that's where the macro view of how to handle the issue, right? You take that sort of concern, the anxiety, all those sorts of stress and all that sort of thing out of people's hands, right? Because it's a global issue, and the global leaders should be dealing with it accordingly. But again, I don't want to go too far down that route.
Yeah.
It's not really talking to the topic that we've raised.
But just on that as well, I think there's like, I totally understand that you feel that way. But personally, I feel like there's a level of sovereignty that people need to be exercising, right? And what they do and how they approach things is important. And I think this time is actually proving that to people more than ever, because whatever you're being told to do, it's on you to do it or not, right? And in terms of like leadership worldwide, you definitely need leadership to steer the ship at any level of anything, right? Whether it be government or within a business or within your family. But your sovereignty in how you act, and you should have a level of reliance on yourself too.
100%, 100%, man. Like,
if you're looking to world leaders to solve your problems at your micro level, and by micro I mean at your individual level or your family unit level or like your small medium business level, I think you're in for a world of hurt if you're trying to apply what is essentially a super macro approach and advice to your individual situation. And you need to be aware that you are responsible for your shit.
100%, man. Like, I think, and don't get me wrong and think that I'm trying to remove that from anyone.
Not at all. I didn't think you were.
Yeah, no. But regardless of any situation, whether it's quote unquote normal or a global pandemic, every individual on this planet has one sole responsibility, and it's just to be responsible for your own shit. 100%.
100%.
And again, regardless of any situation, you must, and that never changes in my mind.
It doesn't at all.
That never
You're
changes.
right about that, man.
Yeah,
it doesn't.
Okay, so moving a bit deeper into the conversation, right? And I want to touch back on what you said about discomfort and having this reliance or thinking that normalcy is what is the relieving factor. My feelings on that is, so if you think about what normal is or what it's conventionally perceived as, it's a state, and a state implies solidity, it implies structure, it implies it's like a capture in a point in time, it's stagnant, it's stationary, and the commentary and narrative is a return, a return to normalcy, going back, right? And there's like for me, it's like a attachment to a mental conception, that never changes. But that's the key for me, right? So for me, I have a very different view. I think the word normal is, it's very wishy-washy. It's very ambiguous. It doesn't mean anything to me because...
Very subjective too.
Correct. Because for me, everything around us is continually changing, right? Including ourselves. And to cling on to something that is solidified and calcified and just is what it is and never changes, that in itself is a very dangerous way to think about things, So talk to me about that. What do you think?
Well, I think when I think about normal, my view about what people or what is perceived as normal is a bit different. Because normal to me is more along the lines of when someone says, or you're looking at something as the norm, it's the general level of where it's at, taking out of the equation the extremes either side of, right? So it's like in a business, when things are normal, you've got a certain level of sales, your interactions are at a certain level, supply and demand is at a certain level, And that's what's considered generally as norm, right? Like nothing's rocking the boat. And I think that's why when I think about people talking about wanting to go back to normal right now, it's because the boat is fucking rocking, man.
Yeah.
Like the boat is rocking
Yeah.
for a lot of people. And it's actually rocking for everyone, because even if you're someone who's thriving during this time, right, that is not your normal. That's not your homeostasis. And that's the thing. Going back to normal, I feel like there's, as you said earlier, there's this connotation, man, that it's like things are really bad right now. And in a lot of ways, yes, you could say they're bad, but in a lot of ways, they're good too. And we need to decide as individuals what we actually want to, quote unquote, go back to. Because do you want to let go of all the other great stuff that's happened? And say, if you're someone who's in a business right now that's thriving, are you going to want to go back to normal? Probably not. Right. And if you're an individual who's, started to do something that you wanted to do during this time because you were given more time because of whatever circumstance you found yourself in, you might not want to go back to normal either.
Yeah.
I think people need to be really careful about what they wish for, because you get those things, right? What we focus on is what we get. And, don't want to go into it super deep, but that's what the law of attraction is, right? Which is the things that you focus on, and the way you focus on them is what will materialize in your life, right? And the thing is, if you're someone who's actually benefiting from this time, and there are things that you're experiencing that you really like and that you enjoy, but then on the other hand, you're saying, I want things to go back to normal, be careful what you wish for, because they will.
Yeah.
And then you're going to lose those things too. And I think people just need to really consider. So what you asked me about is like what I think about normal is what are you considering as normal?
Yeah.
People really need to define that. And that is something that is definable. You need to define what your normal is. And then you need to work out if that's where you actually want to be at. I don't want to go back to the way things were before this, because there's things that I've realized that, I wasn't taken care of, that I should have been taken care of. And there's other things as well that, I was doing that have helped me during this period as well, that have enabled me essentially to weather it much differently had I not done those things, right? So those are things that I want to keep doing and go back to being able to do, right? Because they've helped me during this time. But then there are other things that, I don't want to go back to. And so for me, working out what that normal is super important. And I think it's something that people should really consider and work out.
Yeah. Yeah. And really good analogy to use with rocking the boat, right? And I want to continue on that for a little bit. To feel like, or always want to remain in a state of normalcy, right? And that seems like the desire is like being out in the ocean on a boat and hoping that the seas are calm all the time. And if you think about that, it's obviously a delusion, because it's never going to be like that, right? There's always going to be storms. There's always going to be, tumultuous rain. There's always going to be, there's ebbs and flows of the ocean, right? So all that comes back down to a level of perception, like you said, right? If we see the world, or we wish for the world to be continually still and calm and normal and never fluctuating and never going up and down and all the way around, as it does, as the ocean does, then we're not going to be prepared for times like these and prepared to see all the benefits that you can derive within those situations, right? Just like you said, you yourself, we've all benefited from this. You and I have benefited from this time. We've talked about this off camera, off record, that this time has been great for us in different ways. And again, you talk about the businesses that are actually thriving in this time. This is just some examples that it's possible, right?
Yeah.
Good things can come from perceived bad situations. And perception is the key word there,
Yeah.
right? The key word, perception and a level of awareness to it, right? So that's what I mean when we're talking about this collective sort of mind frame of wanting to return to normal. And like I said, for me, even to say that, and like I can agree with you that we can define normal, but again, this is all just semantics for me, and whether that definition is something that is solidifying what your conception of the word is. Are we like putting it into a box? And like for me, I can define normal for myself as just that, something that is always changing. So it's paradoxical, but that's how I would define it.
Yeah. And I guess the thing is, while you don't want to put everything into a box, sometimes it helps to actually label things, right? Because then you can work out how you feel about them and what you're going to do about
Yeah,
them.
of course. And that's the right way to look at it,
Yeah.
in that the definition really isn't what defines everything and how you think about it. But it's a use of a tool. Correct. Which is what language is, right? As a tool for communication. So very different, slightly nuanced, and we have to think about that like a little bit deeper to sort of understand, because with like, you know, language is such an off the cuff natural thing now.
Yeah.
But yeah, I also want to talk about, and this might be a little bit interesting, now stepping back from the current situation and looking more generally in our own personal experiences. Maybe growing up, I think it might be interesting to have a look at what normal was for us, or is, or how it is, how it has evolved over time. Yep. So, you know, if I asked you to think about normal, maybe when you were growing up until now, what was it for you?
Well, for me, normal has changed over time. What's been normal for me has been, you know, different at different stages, very different stages of my life. I've definitely had certain things that have been constant. You know, I have an awesome and very loving family. So for me, family life, normal family life, has been being in a really loving, caring, nurturing family. That's been normal for me. And I know I'm very fortunate in that regard, right? Because a lot of people, and you know, a lot of people I know don't have that as their base for family. But that's what's been normal for me. And while I think about that, I think that what has been normal for you as you grow up actually dictates what you think, what you're going to make your normal later in life.
Totally.
And what your expectations of normal are, right? And even though I've had this amazing family life, it's not to say that, you know, there hasn't been there hasn't been troughs in that as well. You know, there's been things that I've experienced myself, things that our families experienced as a collective that have been just shit. You know, nothing's ever perfect. Life goes up and down in a wavy or jagged line, depending on who you are, the experiences you have, and the meaning that you attach to those experiences. And so that part, in terms of what's been normal for me, my family as a generally though, like if I level it out, normal for me has been love, care. You know, I've had an open relationship with, you know, the different people in my family. We can communicate, we can share things with each other. So that's been normal for me. Also, the other thing that's been normal for me has been to put in effort into things, you know, that I've deemed as important. Whether when I was at school, that was to study, because at that point in time in my life, it was like, cool, man, you study hard, you get good grades, then you can move on to university, which is the thing you should do. And then from that, you get a good job. So like, I always had this achievement mindset, whether I looked at it like that or not. I reflect on that now that I'm older, and what's normal for me has been to have something in mind that's like a greater goal, and to work towards that goal and to put in the effort that you need to put in to get there. Right. So that's been normal for me as well.
Mm.
And yeah, so if I leave it at those two for the moment, I think normal for me has, or that norm for me has dictated how I live my life, right? Which is like always have something that I'm striving towards, working towards. You know, my level of effort towards those things obviously varies over time, but I've always had that as a norm in my life. And my family being, you know, family life being good by most measures has also been, you know, really beneficial to me, I think. And I think it served me well as my norm. You know, whereas I have other people that are super close to me that don't have that type of family life. And so their norm is very different.
Yeah.
And how they operate because of that is very different. And for me, you know, I think it's also affected how I show up in relationships with those around me, what I give, how I receive, all those sorts of things.
Yeah.
So yeah, man, that's been my norm. But one thing, if I can touch on, you know, for the current time, just to briefly go back, is you know, I always do say life happens for us and not to us, and that's, you know, a matter of perspective. It's a perspective that you choose. And you were saying that, you know, this time has been beneficial for us, but I want to point out for people that that's massively because of the perspective that we choose to take.
Totally.
Right? My businesses
Absolutely.
are suffering massively. Like financially, they're suffering a lot. Right? But I'm using this time and this experience and what's happening and that experience, right? What's going on to show me what I need to take care of, what I need to be addressing, what I need to bolster for the future in case, you know, something happens again where we're not able to do things the way that we want to do them. So in that way, it's been great, learning a lot. And I think the perspective you take is going to dictate how you endure anything, because life is just the experiences we have and the meaning we attach to them.
Yeah.
Right. The experiences are arbitrary depending on who you are, but it's the meaning that we attach to them. And then coming back to normal, it's we give a meaning to normal.
Yeah.
Right. It's the experiences that we've had, the moments that are emblazoned in our memory and the meaning we've attached to those that describe what our normal is and what we internalize that as.
Yeah.
That's what's been normal for me, I would say, as life has progressed. And how about you, man?
Yeah, just to lightly touch back on to what you were saying about, you know, thriving within this period. Thriving doesn't always necessarily need to be attached with any financial, you know, definition at all, right?
Yep. So important to point out.
That's very important to point out. Like, again, same with you, mate. I mean, I financially, I'm not doing that great, but, you know, I'm still, you know, super happy and super blessed and super thriving within this period, you know, and I'm super enjoying it. So very important to note that.
Yeah.
But
sorry on that,
yeah,
which I just want to point out is like, I feel that people that are experiencing anything good during this period are also being vilified a bit. It's like, you know, how dare you talk about this time being a blessing, or how dare you talk about the good things that are happening? And I'm like, mate, just straight out, like, you have to be some type of loser to shit on the success of other people, no matter what period of time it is.
Yeah, that's like, an interesting way.
I just feel that way, man. And I want to point it out because I don't know, like, I feel like people that do that do it unconsciously or unknowingly, that's what they're actually doing.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think it's really wrong, man, to make people feel guilty about their success just because you're not experiencing it however you deem that to be. Yeah. And so I just want to point that out, man, because that's something that's been on my mind as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, I personally haven't seen too much of that going on lately, but yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, I'm sure that sort of happens. It happens all the time, really, regardless of situation, as we said.
Yeah, man.
But yeah, like you said, it's largely going to be relatively unconscious or unreflective you know, and very reflexive sort of comments that people make based on the situation that they're dealing with at the point in time.
Yeah.
But yeah, thanks for pointing that out, bro. Now going back to normal for me, it's been, and I think listeners will start to sort of feel like the different relationship that you and I have with the word. You are much more okay with it than I am, it seems. And this is because, I mean, as a ethnic background guy growing up in Australia, I think that I'm already coming into this situation and environment with a very different take on what normal is, right? Because normal is all the Australian Caucasian kids surrounding me at school, and that's not what I was. I was Asian, you know, I had different colored skin, different features, different colored hair, all that sort of stuff, right? So from that regard, and I would say that largely through most of my life up until, you know, 7, 8 years ago, I've always had a problem to some extent with what was perceived as normal around me, you know? And if we go back to what you were saying about finding relief from these situations, my way of doing that was trying to fit in or playing the certain roles of perceived normalcy that surrounded me. So I would play different personas, put on different masks. So, you know, in school, I would put on the mask of a cool kid, or put on the mask of a underage drinker, a smoker, a car guy, an anime guy, a drug user, a corporate, all that sort of stuff. Those were my ways of finding relief from this feeling of not being adequate enough to fit into this mold of normalcy. So that's why I've always had a very strange relationship with it, like almost rebellious, right? And for me, it feels like being pushed into a certain box, right? Which is something that I now very much do not do at all. And that's why I guess I come back to the general perception, this view of a fixed thing. It's defined, you know, it is one thing or another. It's this dualistic thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's either what it's defined as or it's not. So I guess that has never sat with me well, and it's always sort of molded my perception of what normal is. My perception of normal now is very different to what it was and how I deal with it. Like I said, it's very fluid, and I sort of just playing this persona of the flow guy. Like that's just all I do. I sort of just float around and understand that the life around me is happening, and I just adjust and adapt and pivot according to it. And I just listen to my intuition on how I feel that I should be approaching my life. So yeah, that sort of covers my relationship with the word, I guess.
Yeah. There's a couple of things as well that you bring up that made me think of some things regarding normal. And it's that one of them is, firstly, just because something's considered normal, like at a collective level, doesn't mean it's right or
100%,
good,
100%.
right? Because the thing is, right, like I'm ethnic too. And, you know, when I went to school, like especially my youngest school, like it was in a really, you know, predominantly like white area. So that was different. What was normal there was different. And then when I moved, what was normal there was different. And, you know, there was good parts to each place and bad parts to certain places, and certain things that, you know, were considered normal at the time, like the way that people were bullied, you know, what you accepted as normal behavior, you know, people now balk at. And things that, you know, like you considered normal at one time are really abnormal in different stages of your life.
Totally.
And I think with that, what's really important is that's why I think it's important to define normal for yourself and to think about it, because you need to work out whether the norm that you are accepting, because that's what you're doing, right? Generally, when you like something's normal, you're accepting it as normal, whether that's what you want to accept. And I think that's why I need to find, or not even find, you need to cultivate what you want to be normal, right? Because there are people that, you know, lived a certain way, they didn't like that, or they didn't want that to be their existence or their normal, and they've taken actions to change their lives to be living in a different state, right? And that's what they now find as their normal, right? They've gone from a place they don't want to be to a place they do want to be, and it's like consistent. That's another thing about the word normal that I want to point out, is I think you need to look at it, or people view it as a level of consistency. Like there's a consistency to normal, right? Like that's the way it is.
Mm.
And I think, you know, there can be things that persist, like there can be things that are bad that persist and are consistent. And just because it's normal, it doesn't mean that you should accept it. There's certain types of things that happen normally in different places and in different contexts that shouldn't be accepted.
Yeah.
And we need to be mindful of that. So I think it's also really important to point out that we shouldn't just accept what is thrown on us as normal, or thrust upon us as normal. You know what I mean? Because like when we went to school, because we went to school at the same time, like not the same school, but the same period, right?
Yeah.
There was shit that, like, the way people used to treat each other, that was fucking terrible, man.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's a different time to now. Like where everybody's vocal about certain things, and there's like straight up just minorities talking about things and being really loud. Like when we were at school, that wasn't a thing, man.
Yeah.
There was no social media, right? There was no internet when we were in early school. And things that were accepted as being normal or just the way it is were things that you wish you didn't have to accept.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to point out, man, because that still happens to people in different areas, different places, different contexts. There's things that are deemed as normal that they don't want to accept, or that they feel are wrong. You know, so just because it's deemed as normal doesn't mean it's right.
100%. And I think you and I can be examples of that to a certain extent. Because if you follow the general trajectory or collective understanding of what normal is, everyone sort of knows the roadmap, you know. It's go to school, go to university, get a good job, retire, enjoy life, right?
Yeah, like that's the Western roadmap.
Yeah. Now, you and I have walked that path, and we've broken out of that path as well. And we've found our new sense of what we think is normal, right? And you talk about
what we'd like to be normal.
Correct.
For us.
Correct. And you talk about consistency, right? And it's a good word, because how I view it is, and you have to think about this as well, and it's something to ponder. And again, it's just this is the way I think, right? Inconsistency can also be consistent.
Okay. What do you mean by that?
In that it is what it is, right?
It is.
Yeah. Like a level of inconsistency can be consistent in your life, in that everything in your life is consistently inconsistent, you know? So that for me is how I see it. Like, again, this is just my drawing toward, like, a love of paradox, because I feel like this really spells out deeply, you know, in my heart what life is all about. It is never this linear thing. It is never black and white. And it is never solidified in one thing or another. It's so contradictory, life is.
Well,
so that
what you said about life that it can be consistently inconsistent, that is the reality of our existence.
100%.
Everybody. And
100%.
everybody is living through that right now.
100%.
Right? Because whatever you were doing consistently, I guarantee you're not doing now. No matter who you are and where you are.
Exactly.
So life is consistently inconsistent.
Yeah.
That's a really good point, man.
So, where we cling to what is consistent, this builds the inability to handle or be resilient enough to navigate inconsistent times or uncertain times, So yeah, that's
in terms of consistency. I think one thing that does need to be said is that the consistency in certain elements of your life should be, a virtue you have, right? So for me personally, like having a consistent pursuit of something that I'm trying to achieve, that has been very beneficial for me.
Yeah, definitely. 100%. 100%.
And things that you do, like if you're consistent with taking care of your body, it's going to work out great for you.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
If you're consistent in your pursuit of certain things, it works out very well for you.
Yeah.
So
100%.
something should be, I think, striving for consistency in certain areas of your life is a good way to go. However, thinking that things are going to remain consistent and be consistent, and that your life is going to be consistent and conditions are going to be consistent and the people around you are going to behave consistently, that's dangerous.
Yeah.
Because then, as you've been saying, right, throughout our conversation today, like if you cling to that and you don't essentially have resiliency for when things go wrong or don't go the way that you are used to them happening, right? Like there is inconsistency in your status quo and what you find normal. If you're not prepared for that as well, you're going to be in for a world of hurt.
100%. How I would word that, and I completely agree with you, man, is that it's a level of discipline, in how you approach life, however you choose to do that. And to put it very simply, right, is that everything around you, your environment, everything that is external to you, that is inconsistent, right? i.e., it lacks control from our end. It's not within our control. Everything external is inconsistent, but everything inside of us, we can choose for it to be consistent and disciplined with that. That doesn't change. That doesn't necessarily have to change according to what happens outside due to external influence. So yeah, maybe that's a nice way to wrap the conversation, unless you have anything else to say about it, mate.
No, man, I think we've covered a good amount today.
All right, cool. So, Shaun, why don't you let everyone know where they can find you, mate?
So, best place to find me is on Instagram. This is my personal account, Shaun_Coop. So it's SHAUN_COOP. And where can they find you, Les?
Yep, just hit me up on my website, guys, findingspace.co. And also on Facebook and Instagram, it's findingspace.co. You can hit me up on any of those channels and find me there. Also, you can get us both on our email account if you want to send us through any topics, suggestions, or you want to be interviewed by us. It's the Hustle and Flow podcast at gmail.com.
Awesome. Love to see some stuff come through from you guys on that. We'd love to discuss some topics that you guys are eager to hear us discuss, or that you want a bit of a different perspective on, that might be a bit different to how you think about it. And that's why we have these conversations, which is to evoke, different points of view, to discuss them and bring to the forefront different ways of looking at things, which is, served each of us really well. And we feel that it could help a lot of people. So with that as well, do you just want to quickly talk about the fee for this podcast, which we always talk about, which is if you found something of value here today, if you got a little nugget, something that you think might help someone else as well, please do us a favor and just share it with one other person. We're on iTunes, Spotify, and Stitcher now. So if you could also jump on there, subscribe, rate us, we'd really appreciate that. And we've put it on all platforms, so it's really easy to share and so that you guys can listen to it the way that you prefer. So thanks a lot for listening, guys. We hope you got something out of today. I certainly did. I always do from our conversations, bro. And
Likewise.
yeah, until next time, guys.
See you guys.